Next up, it's a Korea Book Club, our weekly segment looking at the world of Korean literature through works available in translation and beyond. And for that, we have our literary critic, Barry Welsh, joining us in the studio once again. Barry, hello. It's good to see you.
Yes, good evening.
Okay, so what do you have for us today?
So tonight we're reviewing a small collection of poems by Hwang Dong-kyu, translated by Brother Anthony, and the collection is called Wind Burial, or Pungjang in Korean, and the Korean collection was published back in 1995. The entire collection, the entire Pungjang collection, hasn't been translated. I think there's over 70 poems in it, but you can find a selection of 5 of the poems on Brother Anthony's website, including the poems Wind Burial number 1 and Wind Burial number 3. And, you know, many listeners, I'm sure, will know that Hwang is an extremely popular poet in Korea. His works have enchanted, you know, many readers over the years. He is an older gentleman now. He's at around 84 years old, and I believe he's retired. But he was very active, you know, not just as a poet, but also as an academic. He was a translator and a literary critic. And, you know, he debuted all the way back in 1958. He was a professor for many years in the English Language and Literature Department of Seoul National University. And he has, of course, won many of the big poetry and literature prizes in Korea as well. So in 1980, he won the Korean Literature Award. And then about a decade later, he won the Isan Literature Prize as well. And although he is so beloved and celebrated here in Korea, he is not as well known, I think, to, you know, general English readers, which really is a great shame, because as these poems we're going to talk about show, he's a very talented writer and a craftsman with a distinctive voice.
Yes, so I understand that Hwang is genuinely a revered poet in Korea, as you say. His career spans over 5 decades, and he has published many famous volumes of poems, including One Clear Day in 1961 and Snow Falling in Samam in 1975, in which he touches on various themes. But one of the themes he is best known for is death, musings about death, and that's what he explores in the collection we're talking about today. So how is Hwang writing about death in these poems then, Barry?
Right, so this Wind Burial collection, so there's several dozen poems in it, and it was written, I believe, over 14 years before it was published in 1995, and he was almost 60 when this collection was finally published. So he started writing these poems when he was a middle-aged man, I guess roughly in his mid-40s, and these poems, they're all about this experience of reaching and then moving beyond middle age into your later years. So he's at least, you know, he's partly writing about this major milestone in a person's life, transitioning from your peak, as it were, in middle age, and then into the beginning of the decline into old age. And if you let me read the first stanza from Wind Burial number 1, I think that'll give you an idea of the tone.
Sure.
So here we go. When my life is done, let my body be left exposed to the wind, dressed as I am with my electric watch still working, strapped to my wrist to prevent me feeling sad. Put me into a rented taxi inside a leather suitcase so that I don't feel too cold. Then off to Kunsan, or if the searches are too severe, Komso will do, and there transfer me to a barge. And so yeah, this is someone who's beginning or facing up to their mortality, looking at the end as it approaches, and then letting everything go. And there's a really wonderful essay about these death poems by Professor Hwang Hoon-sung, who's a literature professor at Dongguk University and also a poet. And he calls these poems of Hwang Dong-kyu a tour de force of his profound insight into death and life. And this insight is that life itself is a burial process that we all experience.
Yes, well, Barry, first, thank you for that reading. Beautifully read. I understand that these poems are also inspired by a folk burial tradition tradition. Can you tell us a bit more about these folk traditions that Hwang was inspired by when writing this sequence of poems in death?
Right, so super interesting. So wind burials, or they're sometimes referred to as sky burials. So this is a folk tradition in which the corpse is left out in the open and allowed to decompose and disappear gradually. And it's practiced, or it was practiced, in some Chinese provinces and also in Tibet and Mongolia and other places. And the poems in wind burial, the sort of 70 poems, are linked by this symbol, this recurring a symbol of this wind burial, and the wish for Hwang, the poet, to be buried in wind, as he says. And we can sort of see this as a way of recognizing death as a natural process. It's death as part of life, and that this disappearing is something that happens to all of us, and it happens to us all continuously throughout our lives, not just at this sort of one single moment of death. So in this sequence of poems, that first stanza we read, that was Hwang's sort of spirit or revenant or soul, but sort of beginning this journey and here he's going to Sonyu Island, and gradually disappears. And later in that same poem, he writes, covered with the wind like a quilt, without makeup or deliverance, adjusting the wind as one adjusts a quilt, until all the body's last drop of blood has dried, let me play with the wind. And I think perhaps we can see here that as painful and sad as death inevitably is, we shouldn't fear it. We get the sense we get to leave the world of our struggle behind and go back into nature. And there's something almost quite Buddhist about this, and the sort of acceptance that Hwang displays in these poems. He is just giving in to death without protesting. And I think perhaps that's an attitude he's telling us, an attitude to death that we should all perhaps try to cultivate.
Yes, perhaps this sort of burial is quite alien to us who are used to practices such as burial or cremation or even being buried at sea, but it's quite a powerful image, allowing a body to slowly disappear in the wind as such, although perhaps that's only possible in colder, windier climates like Tibet and Mongolia. But anyway, Barry, what do you think we should make of these poems then? I understand that Hwang has commented on the works and how he views them when looking back on them.
Right, so at around the time this collection was published, so he'd been working on them for such a long time, he also wrote and published an essay collection called The Light and Shadow of My Poetry, and that whole sort of poetry collection hasn't been translated yet, but again, Professor Hwang Hoon-sung from Donggu University translated a small section in an essay that he wrote, where he records, Hwang is saying, wind burial is an allegory for life itself. Unwittingly we're dying gradually. Wind burial in this view is nothing less than our life itself, which dies gradually while continually winning over or being defeated by death. And he goes on to conclude by saying that life and death are both sides of the same coin. And these ideas, they run through the poems, this one, the wind burial sequence, like this idea that life and death are inseparable, that we have to make our peace with that, and this acceptance of death and life is with us all the time, and it's a process that we have to go through, and we should try and befriend it. And I think these are truly inspirational poems, and certainly well worth reading.
Yes, they sound quite mysterious and melancholic.
Yes,
but perhaps some life-affirming elements.
Yes, absolutely.
As well, in somewhat of a counterintuitive way, should we say. It sounds very interesting. We'll post a link of Brother Anthony's translations on our Twitter and Instagram pages so our listeners can seek them out if they are interested to see the poems for themselves. Once again, the collection is called Wind Burial, or Pungjang by Hwang Dong-kyu. Next week, Beth will be joining us, so this is the last time we're seeing you this year, Barry, actually. So
that's right.
It's been another busy year with lots of works that we've covered. As a final thought today, and a very brief roundup of the year, should we say, what was your perhaps a literary highlight this year. What was your favourite book of 2022?
Okay, so it was very difficult to single out one book to mention here, so just let me very quickly mention a couple of books, okay?
Sure,
so I think this year there was a great year for Korean novels that were drawing on the crime or thriller genre elements and sort of doing all sorts of really interesting things with them. So earlier in the year we had Gu Byung-mo's Old Woman with the Knife, which was this incredible sort of spin on the assassin genre, but with an older Korean lady as a central character, which was fantastic. And again, it has important and serious things to say, but also just a sort of super fun, enjoyable genre book. And then also using that sort of crime genre to do interesting things and look at society in different ways was Kwon Yosun's Lemon, which we read way back as well. So a murder mystery that sort of unspools over a couple of decades. And also, Kumsuk Gendry Kim's graphic novel The Waiting was an incredible piece of work, which, you know, again, is dealing with sort of Korean history and, you know, personal history relationship between a mother and a daughter. And again, just a beautiful and sort of heartrending piece of work. And also, what else can I say? So, J.M. Lee's novel Broken Summer was also fantastic. Again, a sort of crime-adjacent story about a sort of murder mystery that sort of spans several decades. And then perhaps also Kim On-soo's The Cabinet, which I think was an excellent novel that not many people seem to talk about this year. This sort of extremely interesting and different and strange sci-fi book. And maybe I'd also like to say, finally, Soo-jin's Korean Teachers, which again, you know, had all sorts of important things to say about Korean language education and the role of teachers in Korea.
I think that was a wonderful whirlwind roundup of the year. We appreciate that. Some great titles there to check out for anyone who has perhaps missed them this year. Okay, we'll leave it there, Barry. Thank you as always. Merry Christmas,
yes.
and we'll see you again in the new year. Take care.
Okay, Merry Christmas.